Giadiva Harja, Tama Arasher East. Hey, have y'all ever wondered what the cardinal directions are in Irish and exactly how to use them? Well, you're in luck, because that's what I'm going to show y'all in this video. So go on and buckle up, because we're not leaving anything out today. Alright, as promised, the Irish cardinal directions. As I go through this video, you'll see notes like this up on the other side of the screen, and feel free to follow along with me for the best experience. Okay, first let's look at the blue box on top. Let's learn how to talk about cardinal directions in Irish. The cardinal directions in English are north, south, east, and west. But in the green box below that, you'll see that Irish cardinal directions are a bit different from English in that one must use different words depending on whether the direction is indicating a fixed location, a direction towards, or a direction from. You'll find as we go through this that there are some similarities in how this works to Irish up and down. So if you haven't watched Up and Down, that might be another good video to watch before or after this video. But for today's purposes, let's start with north. An Tuaisceart is the north. This is referring to a fixed location, as in the general area that is located to the north. At the end of this set of words, I am going to be giving some examples of each so that it all comes together and makes sense. Next we have Ohue, which means northward or to the north. This is an adverb used to describe motion towards the north. Now in the green box below that, I'm going to explain something that had me confused for a long time, but I finally found the answer to it. So note, even though O usually means from in Irish, it's a completely different word that means towards when speaking of cardinal directions. Why? Because this O is a shortened version of the older word fo, which means in the direction of. So that whole puzzle is one thing that had me confused about directions in Irish in the first place, because I was thinking, well, how can Ohue mean to the north if O means from? Shouldn't it be from the north? But no, this O is shortened from fo, which means toward, which I just said. And last we have adue, which means down from the north. This adverb is used to describe motion from the north. Now, a quick note before we get into our examples. Note, though the movement is technically southwards, adue highlights the direction something is coming from rather than its destination. And as you'll see later, of course, you can choose to say to the south in place of adue in a lot of cases. But depending on the situation and the perspective being discussed, then sometimes you'll need to or want to highlight where something is coming from rather than where it's going to. So that's why words like adue are important. Now let's look at some examples of how to use these different forms of north. Our first example is Ta Siún ina Coney e Tuaisceart na Tíre. Siún lives in the north of the country. So in this case, the best choice was the noun, the fixed location form of north. She lives where? In the north of the country. There's no motion involved in this north, it's just the area where Siún lives. For our next example, we have Hamwan Siún Ohue Gadeya. Siún drove north or northward to Derry. In this north, there's motion involved, and she's going toward Derry, so Ohue was the best choice. For our last example, we have Hanek Siún Adue Hun Funartlin or Faishartnia. Siún came south from up north to stay with us for a week. In this sentence, Adue was chosen because where Siún's coming from is being highlighted. So now that we took an in-depth look at north, we can easily understand how to use the various forms of the other directions. For these, I'm not going to give individual examples after each section, but there are going to be a group of examples after the rest of them. So the set of words for south now is Ajeshkyart, the south, Oyas, southward, and Anyas, which means up from the south, toward the north. Now for east. Now before I read these words, let me just pre-tell y'all that I'm pronouncing these was my best attempt at a West Gweedore way. Gweedore is in the Ulster dialect. Now, I prefer the West Gweedore pronunciation, specifically of slender R's, mostly because they are very pronounced and very different from broad R's, so it helps me to distinguish the two. So a slender R is an R that comes after an I, well, technically an E or an I, but I can't actually think of an example where an E comes directly before an R. I might be wrong, but anyway. So for all intents and purposes, a slender R is an R that comes after an I. An E or an I are slender vowels. A broad R is an R that comes after an A or U, which are broad vowels. And slender R's and broad R's are supposed to be pronounced different from each other. So in all these words for east, a slender R is involved. So in parts of Gweedore, specifically West Gweedore, I believe it is, the slender R is often pronounced almost like a Y. So the east would be Anteher. Eastward, Shay. Over from the east toward the west is Ane. Also notice that in the middle word there, Shay, I pronounced the S as though it is slender. A broad S in Irish sounds like a regular English S, and a slender S sounds like sh, sh. Now normally, if a broad vowel, in this case O, comes after the S, it should be pronounced like a regular S. So you'd think this would be say. But for some reason, in this word, the S is pronounced as though it's slender. So shay instead of say. But as far as I know, that's only in Ulster, which is in the north of Ireland. But elsewhere in Ireland, I believe the S is pronounced broad. Also elsewhere in Ireland, a slender R will sound a lot more like a ZH sound, kind of. So you might hear Anteger, Sej, or an edge. In some places in Ireland, like from what I've observed in most of Ulster outside of Gweedore, the slender R is very hard, at least for my American ear, hard to distinguish from the broad R. Like I can't hardly ever tell a difference. So that's why I gravitate toward the Gweedore slender R, because I like to hear a difference and I like to pronounce the difference. Anyway, oh, and by the way, in the East, that small t before the O is just prefixed on there because this is a masculine noun that has the definite article the before it. If you take away the and you just say east as a fixed location noun, it's just aher. But the east, a teher. Same thing with west here coming up. So the west, a cheerher. If it was just west, it would be earher. Westward, or to the west, is sheer, and over from the west toward the east is a near. Okay, so I have a note now on the next page about perspective, which is key in determining what words to use for the cardinal directions. So, note, perspective can make a difference in choosing the best motion adverb. For example, if you're describing someone's movement toward yourself, then use the adverbs that start with an A, like adue and anas. But if you're describing someone's movement away from yourself, use the O/S starting adverbs, like ohue, and sheer. If you're describing your own movement, use the adverbs starting with an A if you're describing your movement closer to your audience, but choose the O/S adverbs if you're describing your movement farther away from your audience. I have some examples now that'll make all that clear, hopefully. Hannak Shananay hun frastel Erinelum. Shan came out west from the east to attend the festival with me. So the movement in this case is toward myself. It's toward the speaker, describing where my friend Shan came from. Even though we're saying that he came out west where I am, he's coming from the east. So a nay is the best choice. The next example, Wog Mayefer She hun Bielen a Oscoch. My sister moved eastward to open a restaurant. This describes movement away from me, away from the speaker. We can assume from the context that my sister used to live in the same general area as I do now, but at some point she moved away from me toward the east. So the adverb starting with an S in this case, she, is the best choice. The next example, Hanikma Due Erawas. I came south by bus. Now in this instance, I am the speaker and I'm moving. The audience is south of my point of origin. My movement south brought me closer to them, closer to my audience. So the version of our direction starting with A would be the right choice. Adue. I came south from the north by bus. Now let's look at the next example. Huamauyas Erawas. I went south by bus. In this case, the audience is north of my destination. My movement south took me farther away from them. Now, before we move on, to make things a little bit clearer, I want to pop up this illustration on the screen. So let's look again at the last two examples. First, the one where I came south by bus. Let's pretend that the yellow dot that you see on the screen is me, the speaker. And let's pretend that the house in the center of the illustration is where the people I'm speaking to live. So I came south by bus. I'm coming south to them from the north. Hanak me adue erawas. If you imagine yourself living in that house and the speaker saying this to you, you can see how from perspective that highlighting where the person came from would be the best choice here. Now in our other example, Huama oyas erawas, I went south by bus. Let's change the perspective a little bit. So again, the audience is in the house in the center of the illustration, and the yellow dot is still the speaker. He's going south, but he's leaving school bus. He's going south, and the farther south he goes, the more he's leaving the listeners, the audience, behind. I went south by bus. You can imagine if you were in the house and someone was saying this to you, that they went south by bus, how the perspective would make sense, that they're going farther and farther away from you, and so where they're going toward is better to be highlighted than where they came from. Moving on. Our next page deals with the adjective forms of the cardinal directions. So, the adjective versions of north, south, east, and west are the following. Hue, northern, has, southern, hey, eastern, and here, western. These adjectives will be used to describe where a person, place, or thing is located. So, for example, Anafig Hue, the northern office, or the north office. It's the office that's in the north. Next example, Nahinjia Hahe, the East Indies, or you could think of it as the Eastern Indies. Now, in the green box, note that the following terms are used to say that something is to the north, south, east, or west of blank, or that something is on the north, south, east, west side of blank. The terms that I'm about to list can be used interchangeably. So, lastuede or tiuhuede can mean to the north of or on the north side of. Similarly, lasjaste or to haste can mean to the south of or on the south side of. Lasterde or to herde. Notice I didn't say lastede or to heide, because when a slender R comes before D, L, N, T, or S, then it won't be pronounced as though it's a slender R, unless it's a lenited D or T, which just means that an H will come after a D or T, but don't worry about that. So, lasterde, to herde, to the east of or on the east side of. And last, lastjerde and to herde, to the west of or on the west side of. So I'll give one example below. Tan bank lastjerden Lorland. The bank is to the west of the library. Moving on. To use a cardinal direction as a superlative, simply say is faja plus the OS direction. So, for example, Apuncha is faja uhui, the northernmost point. Akundai is faja uyas, the southernmost county. Avin is faja shir, the westernmost peak, and the Limaster Ishka is faja shay, the easternmost body of water. Useful phrases for geography class. Alright, we're moving along quick. Now what about northeast, northwest, southeast, southwest? These are called the intercardinal directions, and unlike in English, the east/west comes first in Irish, and the north or south comes second. So for example, instead of northwest, in Irish it's west-north. And again, the term will change depending on whether it's referring to a fixed location, motion towards, or motion from. To form the correct term when there is motion involved, I'm reading the green box by the way, simply pick the appropriate word for east or west first, depending on the direction of motion, toward or from, and then pick the appropriate word for north or south that matches the motion, toward or from, of the east-west direction. So, examples. Shir ohui, northwestward. Anayanas, from the southeast. In the next green box, the formation of the intercardinals when speaking of a fixed location is a bit different. Write either Anchir, the west, or Ante, the east, followed by Hushkart, north, or Yeshkart, south, all as one word. So, for example, Ante Hushkart, the northeast, or Anchir Yeshkart, the southwest. Top of the next page, to use one of the intercardinals as an adjective modifying a thing or a place, simply use the adjective versions that start with th of the main cardinals, starting with east or west and ending with north or south. So, for example, a canter here hui, the northwest region, or the northwestern region, however you want to think about it. Next example, Angata Hey Has, the southeast gate, or the southeastern gate. And similarly to the main cardinals in the next box, note the following terms are used to say that something is to the northeast, northwest, southeast, southwest of something, or on the northeast, northwest, southeast, or southwest side of something. Laster lastuede, or tu he huede, is to the northeast of or on the northeast side of. Lastjir lastuede, or tu here huede, is to the northwest of or on the northwest side of. Laster lasjaste, or tu he haste, is to the southeast of or on the southeast side of. And last, lastjir lasjaste, or tu here haste, is to the southwest of or on the southwest side of. You see, so far, all this is pretty easy. I think it's just a matter of understanding how it works and then doing some memorizing. But an example of what we just talked about is Vien Lung Tu He Has the Nilan. The ship was southeast of the island. Guess what? That was it. That's pretty much all you need to know about the cardinal directions in Irish. But I do have a few extra tips that I think will be pretty useful, so I'm going to tell you all them first. Okay, the first extra tip. The cardinals tend to be used in more situations in Irish than they are in English. For example, in Irish, you could say, Huail ma fón wohe, which literally means I walked along the road. But just as correctly, you could say Huail ma siar a bóthar, which literally means I walked west the road, but with the connotation of I walked along the road toward west. And just real quick, if you're wondering about the two different versions of the word for the road in the previous two examples, an wohe and an bóthar, are different because after the preposition fáil, you want to use the genitive of an bóthar, which is a wohe. But that ain't what we're talking about today. The next tip is that wind directions are always described with the motion adverbs because of perspective again. The speaker can't see the wind blowing away from him, but he can feel the wind coming to him from somewhere. So again, because of that, you'll want to pick the motion adverbs starting with A to describe wind. Also note that in the case of wind, those same A words can be used as adjectives too. For example, wahishi ahuia dui urhe. She felt the north wind on her face. In this case, a dui is being used as an adjective to describe the wind that's coming from the north and a thwacking her on the face. Third tip. In South Connacht, many people say ohui and oyas in all situations to mean north and south, regardless of perspective. So, for example, while elsewhere one may hear Tashed chart adue, he came south from the north, in Connacht one is likely to hear Tashed chart ohui. The second sentence can have the same meaning as the first, but we can infer that from the north is the intended meaning of Tashed chart ohui in this case because of the words a chart, which imply that he's coming to us from somewhere. So that's just something to be aware of because you might hear speakers from Connacht using ohui and oyas in all situations that might not fit what you learned here earlier. Tip 4. Use the following adjectives to describe where someone or something is from. So, for example, Eastern cuisine, a Southern twang. So the Irish words to use in this type of case are tuishkerta, jeshkerta, ehura, and irhura. Note, these same words can be used as nouns too. For example, is tuishkerta she? She's a northerner. And the last tip, tip 5, sometimes sheer, westward, can mean back. And sometimes, here's where it gets weird, y'all, she's, downward, can mean northward. And suis, upward, can mean southward. I don't know why, it's just a thing to be aware of. So if you hear that, you know what's being said. So, for example, sit back, see sheer, suis go carry, south, up, to carry, she's go day, north, down, to dairy. Again, I don't know, there might be a really, really smart reason why it's said like that, or a historical reason, I'm not sure, but it seems a little bit funny to my brain just because I'm not used to that. But something to be aware of. And last, here again is that illustration that we used a little bit earlier. If you want to refer back to it, I'll have the notes available for download. But this may help you visualize better all the different forms of the cardinal directions. Well, Shinamage, Vishagahinta Maragoni, Rinch Ama Ahaihu Live on Shaw Era YouTube. If you liked this video, please give me a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already. If you would like the notes from this video to refer back to, I'll have those linked below in the caption. And for more Irish content, be sure to follow me on Instagram, which I'll also link below. Gur mai guvarist as a ve puer chatlo menu. Agus, chifa magalua shiv. Gajishin, slan gafol.